Good evening, everyone. My name is Marie Banderzil. Welcome to our webinar tonight. I'm the President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. And this evening's event is an intergenerational conversation which is going to commemorate the past and present future of Mizrachi Jewry. This is going to be a really interesting evening. The Board of Deputies has already hosted a series of webinars on different topics to bring important conversations to the community, and we are delighted to be joined by so many people from around the country this evening. The Board of Deputies, British Jews, is the only democratically elected body which represents the Jewish community in Britain. We work with synagogues and communal organisations from across the country to provide support and represent their needs and interests for the betterment of British Jewry. We are delighted to be working together with the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester and the region in the planning and arranging of this wonderful event tonight. The Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester and the region serves, represents, unites, defends and protects the local Manchester Jewish community and has been doing so since 1919, and we wish them every continued success. Since 2014, the 30th of November has been marked as the day to mark the departure and expulsion of Jews from Arab countries and Iran. November 30th was the date chosen since it's symbolically the day following November 29th, a day when the United Nations partition plan for Palestine was formally adopted, and when many communities of Jews in Arab countries and Iran started to feel the pressure and hostility from their Arab and Persian neighbours. As a result, they were forced to leave their countries. We will hear more about this firsthand from tonight's guests. I would now like to hand over to Russell Conn, the President of the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester and the regions, who will now chair this evening's event and introduce the speakers and entertainment. Over to you, Russell.
Thank you very much, Marie, for your very warm words of welcome and introduction. As mentioned, I am Russell Conn, President of the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester and region, and I'm delighted to be chairing this event this evening. At this evening's event, we will be entertained with Mizrachi music, followed by an interview with an escapee from Iraq. There will be time for questions and answers at the conclusion of this interview. Please place any comment or questions in the comments section throughout the event. They will be monitored and sent on to the interviewer. So first and foremost, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the acclaimed musician Yoav Oved. Yoav is a London-based musician, singing both Mizrachi and Ashkenazi music. He sings regularly with the Westminster Synagogue and is also the lead singer with the new band Eastern Beats. Yoav's ethnical background is of Polish and Yemeni roots. This allows him to explore both musical worlds. His background in opera and classical music, together with his curiosity, brought him to singing the Jewish Arabic music of the world. Tonight we are going to be exploring various musics from around North Africa and the Middle East. We will end up in Iraq. Over to you, Yoav, as we begin with a song from Yemen.
Thank you very much, Russell, for that wonderful introduction. And also thank you, Marie and Edwin and the British Board of Deputies for creating this space to allow Mizrachi music to be performed and educated to the wide world. Please, in the comments, on social media, on YouTube, let us know where in the world you're watching from. I think in today's climate of COVID, it gives us a sense of unity and is super important for the community and everybody to know the places. So today we're going to be visiting some of the older Jewish communities in the Middle East and learning about their cultures and traditions. We'll start with a song that has been accompanying me for about 5 or 6 years, but this time I'm doing it completely different, and this time it is the first time that I'm doing it especially for you. For those that are wondering, this is a typical oil can, and this is, I'll explain a bit more about that later.
دالتي مرملانين علو إلى حي مرم ممكر بين كلهم برها يا علو كلهم برها يا علو الحي هم عليك سأكر لمن يذر شماوي هللو يذر شماوي هللو حياة شهم رسا وشابيم ميام برياني خلالو ميام بريحاني خلالو جل وآفن راشیم مویم شما مکرشیم مزید که ودالا بشیم مزید که ودالا بشیم جل وآفن راشیم مویم شما مکرشیم مزید که ودالا بشیم مزید که ودالا بشیم الحي إيمانين ألو دالتي نادي بمدتي مرملانين ألو دالتي مرملانين ألو
Right, so the song we just heard is called Imnin Alu, and Imnin Alu comes to us from Yemen, where my ethnic roots are. Imnin Alu the words were composed by the great Rabbi Shalom Shabazi in the 17th century, and his words actually bring us into, come into the Diwan, which is a collection of poems that ethnic cultures use for certain occasions like bar mitzvahs, like Shabbat, like all these festives and festivities. The melody itself comes from the capital, which is Sana'a. The words in themselves are pretty interesting, and they talk about the generosity of heaven. The Yirat Shamayim, should compassion no longer be within the people surrounding us, then the gates of heaven will always be open. Those are beautiful words from Rabbi Shalom Shabazi. Yemen, like Babylonia, has been the center point for Judaism since before the Common Era, with many poems and songs coming out of there, and also a wide and rich culture. Sadly, in 1949, there was a mass expulsion of Jews as they were uprooted from their homeland to Israel. These included Jews from Yemen, Iraq, and Libya, to name a few. The Jews from Yemen were brought in on Mavat Qasamin with the magic carpet, and this was done on a secret mission and had to be done very, very quickly because of escalating violence. And in fact, I recently read that during August of this year, the last 50 remaining Jews from Yemen are rumored to be transferred to the UAE. So that's a bit of actual recent history that's going to happen very, very soon, I assume. As we saw, Imnin Alu describes our exact situation of what we're talking about. All the Jews moved and are expelled to Israel. And in fact, in Israel, here's another song from the Sephardi traditions this time. This song has been widely adopted by the Mizrachi communities around the world. And I would encourage you very, very, very strongly to sing along if you know this. And if you don't know this, you'll learn it very, very quickly.
Nagila Alleluia, Nagila, Nagila Alleluia, Nagila, Bazeman, 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 Ageula, Bazeman, 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 Ageula. El Shaddai Eli Eli Kabetsni Dahei Yedidai El Shaddai Eli Eli Kabetsni Dahei Yedidai Vegaresh Mesan Ai Vegaresh Mesan Ai Vegaresh Mesan Ai Vegaresh Mesan Ai Nafshi Bahem Ga'ala Nagila Nagila Alleluia Nagila Nagila Alleluia Nagila Bazeman, Bazeman, Bazeman Ageula Bazeman, Bazeman, Bazeman Ageula Shelachni, Shelachni, Shelachni Beni Shai Go'ali Shelachni, Shelachni, Shelachni Beni Shai Go'ali ובנה לי ביתך לי, ובנה לי ביתך לי, ובנה לי ביתך לי, ובנה לי ביתך לי, ובואי ויעסקה לה נגילה, נגילה הללויה נגילה, נגילה הללויה נגילה, בזמן, בזמן, בזמן הגאולה בזמן, בזמן, בזמן הגאולה רחמן, רחמן, רחמן חוס על עם לא אלמן רחמן רחמן, רחמן רחמן חוס על עם לא אלמן רחמן, רחמן, רחמן חוס על עם לא אלמן רחמן, רחמן, רחמן חוס על עם לא אלמן ושלח להם ציר נאמן ושלח להם ציר נאמן ושלח להם ציר נאמן ושלח להם ציר נאמן יבשר עם סגולה נגילה נגילה הללויה נגילה נגילה הללויה נגילה בזמן, בזמן, בזמן הגאולה בזמן, בזמן, בזמן הגאולה
Fantastic. Link in the comments if you loved the song, if you sang along. We'd love to know how you participated. So this song, as we just heard, is not so old considering the other ones. This is roughly 100 years old. The poet comes to us from Jerusalem, and his name is Asher Mizrachi. And there are a few melodies to this tune, but this popular one is from a guy called Rachamim Amar. This has been instituted into the Jerusalem Sephardic traditions, which really brings it into the wider Mizrachi Arab Jewish communities. Both songs, by the way, that I sang at the beginning were in Hebrew, but sometimes with a bit of Arabic dialects within them. The words in Nagila Hallelujah are very simple, and they tell us of the longing of the Jewish people for redemption, which is a very clear motive throughout Judaism. And this need for redemption is exactly why I'm playing the oil can today. Yemen Jews traditionally still mourn the destruction of the Second Temple, and therefore do not play any musical instruments whatsoever. That is why they would take, for example, a copper tray or an oil can, which aren't really traditionally instruments, and make them into percussion. Part of the oil can performance is my personal attempt to connect further with my Mizrachi roots. So following the example of connecting to your roots wherever you are, I got to know this song through a famous Persian Israeli singer called Rita. I don't know if you know her. She's really, really famous. She brings a lot of joy into her music. And she recently compiled a disc of songs Mi Beit Ima, from the house of her mother. And Rita is a lot closer to her roots. She eats all the traditional food from Iran, and she speaks Farsi. I don't speak the Jewish dialect of Yemen, the Judo-Arabic of Yemen. But in this way, it's really beautiful for Rita to come up and bring in the joy of her culture through the music. And I'd like to play you one song that I learned from her disc. Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell you. I was in my mind. I'd love for you to join in the chorus, and I'm going to teach you the chorus right up to now. So this goes like this. It's super simple and appears a few times through the melody, and this will really help you connect. So I'm just going to teach you it, and I'll play it a few times, and then I'll go into the song. La 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 la. La 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 la. Sing la 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 la. La 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 la. رانچه بیاغید لاله بکارید خنده براهید میره به هجل شد اومد لا 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 باله بارون گل میتکونه دست به دست دونه بدون شد اومد چه قشنگه موی بافتش چه بلنده تازه عروس چه قشنگه چه خوش رنگه همه رنگه مثل طاووس خوش بهار شد اومد دست بزنید و شادی کنید بدومادی کنید بزنید و شادی کنید بدومادی کنید رو جهازش خنده نازش سینه بازش مارماریه همه دور عین و شمدون پرده ایوون کرکریه کریه غانچه بیارید شدن لاله بخرید خندن دومت کجای دست در خانه عشقش خدای گل پسر زل پش کلا بتون لو پش مثل بخون خوش خلاق بخربون شد دومد داره 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 داره
غانچه بیارید لاله بکارید خنده براهید میره بهت لشد اومد بله بارون گل میتکونه دست به دست دونه بدون شد اومد چه قشنگه موی بافتش چه بلنده تازه عروس چه قشنگه چه خوش رنگه همه رنگه مثل طاووس خوش بهار شد اومد رو جهازش خنده مازش سینه بازش مرمریه همه داره عیناش دونه پرده ایوون کریه غانچه بیارید شدن لاله بکارید خندن دومد کجه دست نج خانه اشگج خدای گل پسر سال پاش کلا بتون لپاش مثال خون خوش خلاق نخربون شد اومد
Wow. Certainly strange playing it to not a big crowd, so I don't see you, but I'm sure your reactions are all dancing at home and really enjoying yourself. Let us know how that song played for you. So, Shadumad is a Persian wedding song, and it's in Farsi, and I sang it to you in Farsi. It's very popular around the Iranian communities, and my biggest thanks goes to Rita for putting out this wonderful exploration of her culture and her ethnic roots. The final song for today comes to us from Iraq, where Edwin, our main speaker tonight, was originally born. The song was written by the great Iraqi Jewish musicians, the El-Kuwaiti brothers, Saleh and Daud. They were gifted fiddle and oud players, of course, and wrote for famous Arab singers like Kulthum and Muhammad Abd el-Wahab. In the 1950s, as we know, we heard before, there was a great mass expulsion of Jews from Iraq and from the surrounding Arab nations. And most of the musicians and composers in Iraq were actually Jewish, which led to, within the 1980s, Saddam Hussein ordered the culture ministers to erase all the names of the Jewish composers who composed hundreds of songs, and these became then folk songs, or credit was taken to other musicians, which is really sad to see that that heritage and culture just got erased within within very few years. That hundreds and thousands of years of traditions just vanished. Still, their song today is very popular, and one that I'm going to play to you now is Fogel Nahal, and it's an Arabic classic, and it's still played very much to this day.
فوق النخل فوق فوق يابا فوق النخل فوق ما ادري لا مع حدا يابا ما ادري القمر فوق والله ما اريده باليني بايلوا فوق النخل فوق فوق يابا فوق النخل فوق ما ادري لا مع حدا يابا ما ادري القمر فوق ولا ما اريده باليني بايلوا بلا يا مجرى الماء يابا سالم عليهم صعبا الفرق عليا يابا اشتغنا إليهم ولا ما اريد باليني بايلوا كل يا مجرى الماء يابا سالم عليهم صعبا الفرق عليا يابا اشتغلنا إليهم ولا مريدا باليني بايلوا فوق النخل فوق يابا فوق النخل فوق ما ادري لا مع خدا يابا ما ادري نقمر فوق ولا مريدا باليني بايلوا.
I thank you very much for your kind attention and for participating however you did. And one thing I would encourage all you viewers out there to do is wherever you're from, whichever ethnic culture you're from, go out and explore it. Either bake a food that you've never baked before from your culture, learn a song, play an instrument. It's wonderful. It's really heartwarming to connect with your inner self, with your DNA, with your roots, and you see how that flourishes and brings forth. If you want to follow me on what I do, you can check out my Facebook page, Yoav Oved, and I'd really look forward to meeting you all in person one day, inshallah. And I think now it's time to pass on to our main speaker, Edwin Shuker.
Yoav, thank you very, very much. That was absolutely exceptional. And thank you very much for getting us very much into the spirit and flavour of this evening. And now, without further ado, we are going to hear from our main speaker, which of course this evening is Edwin Shuker. Edwin, as many of you know, is the Vice President or a Vice President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. Edwin was born in 1955 in Baghdad, and he escaped from Iraq with his family in 1971 and came to the United Kingdom, where they were granted asylum. Edwin is a London-based international businessman with a wide range of educational, communal, and charitable involvements. He is a trustee of Mitzvah Day and of Sephardi Voices. And we're very delighted this evening that he's going to be interviewed by the journalist Joseph Timan. Joseph is a British-born Iraqi Jew. He is a local democracy reporter and journalist for the Manchester Evening News, and it is in partnership with the BBC. And he covers local government for Salford and Wigan. And without further ado, I will hand you over to Joseph, who will interview Edwin this evening. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you, Russell. Thanks for inviting me to take part in this wonderful event. And I also have to say thank you to Yoav. I had shivers down my spine listening to you sing. Listening to you singing Fog of Nahal, which always reminds me of my mother, who I haven't been able to see for the last few months because of the pandemic. And I miss her very much, so thank you for that. Thanks for everyone who's joined us tonight. As Russell said, my name is Joseph Timan. I'm a British-born Iraqi Jew. I grew up in London to two Baghdadi parents, and I now live in Salford and work for the Manchester Evening News. Tonight, we are commemorating the 30th of November, a date set by the Israeli parliament. For many Mizrachi Jews in Israel and those of us in the diaspora who mark the day too, it's considered to be a belated recognition of our collective trauma. It's only been marked since 2014. After years of the state of Israel and much of the Jewish world only marking the suffering of European Jews, and of course the Arab countries only marking the Palestinian exodus in 1948. But between 1948 and the early 1970s, around 850,000 Jews left their homes in the Middle East and North Africa. Many fleeing from persecution, some also yearning for a return to Zion. In Iraq, Jews lived side by side in harmony with other ethnic and religious groups for centuries. At the turn of the century, the previous one, around 40% of Baghdad was believed to be Jewish, 40%. And there were 150,000 Jews living in Iraq by 1947. Today, there are just 4 Jews left. And the picture is similar across the Arab world. In Morocco, the Jewish population fell from around 250,000 in 1948 to around 2,500 now. In Tunisia, there are around 1,000 Jews today, and pretty much everywhere else in the Middle East and North Africa, it's down to double digits. Tonight, we have the opportunity to hear what life was like in Iraq before the mass exodus took place. Between 1950 and 1952, 125,000 Jews left Iraq, following a series of discriminatory laws which permitted Jewish emigration only upon forfeiture of their citizenship and the confiscation of their property. But a few stayed and endured regime changes which resulted in the reintroduction of restrictions, anti-Jewish legislation, and the creation of a climate of fear, culminating in mass arrests and hangings. My parents were among those who stayed in Iraq until the early 70s, as was my cousin, Edwin Shuker. Edwin, firstly, welcome, and thank you for joining us to share your stories tonight. My parents both have fond memories of life in Iraq, but they left under difficult circumstances. Can you tell us what life was like growing up in Baghdad, why your family stayed after so many left, and how you eventually escaped?
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. First of all, what an absolute pleasure to hear Yoav too had chills in my spine. But I also am absolutely delighted to be interviewed by my cousin Joseph for various reasons. But one of the most amazing one that I wanted to share with you today was about a year ago, I took a DNA test, and that DNA test was almost like they wanted a regional one. So it was Iraq, Arabs, Kurds, Yazidis, Jews, focused on Iraq to see a common line between them. And the result came from the company, and it says that we are happy to tell you that we found a DNA test that is the closest to you, something like 99 point something. And it's a person called Joseph Timan. So I am delighted, doubly delighted, Joseph, that we share almost the exact DNA after so many years, and to be interviewed by a generation of who is born in this country from Iraqi parents is doubly important for me, because most of what I do, whether it's the film or whether it's the talks, whether it's the going to Baghdad, it really is not for my generation. They know it. They've seen it. It really is for you and my children to keep up that link with that country. That link goes back 2,606 years. My ancestors and most of our ancestors came in 586 before Common Era, when the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, marched the residents of the kingdom of Yehuda into Babylon. And as we know in Psalm 137, they sat by the rivers of Babylon and wept for Zion. I always say they are the first Zionists in the history of the Jewish people. There they sat and wept for Zion. I take up the story, you gave a good summary, and I take up the story. By the time I was born in 1955, the backbone of the community had been broken already, and that 125,000 were flown almost with their clothes on. Men were allowed 3 suits, women were allowed 4 dresses, 1 single ring, 4 books. That's all they could have from an heirloom of 2,600 years. They left practically with the clothes on. And they were flown into the young state of Israel, where most of them started life in tents in the Ma'abarot. When I grew up, there were only a few thousand left. Those who left were people who had properties they didn't want to sell, or were like my father was on the final year of university, so he didn't leave with the big aliyah. It wasn't a representative sector that remained behind. Life, as I remember, it was good, was really good. We had servants, we even had a butler. The rivers were there. The school was one of the best schools probably in the Middle East. We were taught in the Frank Eni school, the Jewish school there, in 4 languages simultaneously. And something reminded me, actually, the Hebrew, we were allowed by the government to study the letters, to read the Bible, to read the Siddur, but never to understand what we're saying. And actually, what I remember, while we were sitting in the class, suddenly we would be raided by 3 inspectors, and they would come in a Hebrew class, and they would come to a student at random and says, "What does that word mean?" And obviously, he doesn't know, because we were not taught that. And they would be satisfied then that we actually only learn Hebrew for ritual and not to communicate in case we become spies. And that was early days. So as I said, life was good. I was 8 years old when suddenly it changed, and it became much, much darker, and very, very suddenly so. How so? There was one more military coup. This time was by the Ba'ath Party, the ones that Saddam Hussein brought back again in 1968. I was 8 years old when we were all asked, the whole community, young and older, babies and older people, to come in with our ID, with our Iraqi identity cards. And we queued there for days in the scorching sun. You would queue in, and if you don't get your turn, you come back again the next day, and so on. And then what was the result of that exercise was to take back our IDs and to actually give us back a different one. This one, a yellow ID. A yellow ID with, as you can see, these are pictures of me and my 2 sisters. And from then on, we were hunted and targeted, because every time you show it, whether it's while you are in a bank, or while you are driving and being asked for, or while you register for a club, you're a Jew. And suddenly we moved into 2nd or 3rd class from a place where we lived in, again, for 2,600 years. One of the laws then started targeting, saying, this is the law for property, this is the law for travel, and then there would be a clause as for the Jews, which was always different. A Jew was not allowed to even sell or rent his own house. And things got worse as we approached the 1967 war with Israel and the Arab countries. And this is not just Iraq. This is the remnants across the Arab world of the Jews, but 10% or less remained from the original 856,000 who were displaced in the early years, and about 8 to 10% remained. And 1967 was the sort of the other spike where we were given hell. Almost we were, well, we were not almost, we were hostages. So from 1963, from the day this change, we were not allowed to travel. Our passports were taken away. And things like what sticks in my mind at that time, we all, as a family, get dressed, going to the usual social club that we were part of. And we get there and there's a sign saying, as of today, Jews have been, their membership have been cancelled and they no longer welcome. And there the family dressed up to just have to go back. And you could understand what one feels as my father, almost embarrassed in front of his own family, having to be rejected like so. As after 67 or just before, Jews were kicked out of jobs, phones were cut out, they were removed physically from every home. University would not accept a Jew only on like social, something that is not required, but you could not possibly dream of going to anywhere like medicine or engineering or anything like with a profession at the end. But things in 1968, July 68, Saddam Hussein came with the second time the Ba'ath came in, and things then became really dark and really hellish. So January 27, 1969, we wake up in the morning and we are told today is a day of celebration. There's no school, there's no offices, just enjoy yourselves, and later we will tell you why. Later came an hour later with the announcement that the reason for the national holiday was the Iraqi government has arrested a spy ring. They have all confessed, they have been tried, and they have been sentenced all in one paragraph, and they were sentenced to death by hanging. And their bodies will now hang in public squares of Baghdad and Basra, and for the Iraqi people to rejoice and go and celebrate. And then the names came, and out of 14 names, 10 of them were Jews. One of them was 16 years old. One of them was 17 years old. People who were picked up at random just because of their Jewishness, and hang all day with the TV live streaming it all day long, and 500,000 people were literally dancing under the bodies and throwing sweets, and each one of those were wrapped in a white linen with the word Jew across the front, and at the back would be his name and his address. And the president of Iraq went, the government of Iraq went to celebrate, and that was the beginning of 2 years where people were arrested. A quarter of all male between 18 and over were arrested, including my father. Some were luckier than the others. Some were literally tortured to death, and others were hung publicly. I want to read to you a paragraph. This is something that we don't normally talk about. It's so painful, but I just read it last weekend again. It is from In the Hell of Saddam Hussein, a booklet by Shaul Hacham Sasson, the son of our chief rabbi. And I'll just read you a paragraph to give you a flavor of what went through these couple of years. And it says, one day they took me out of the room, and I reflected on my plight. This is in a prison called Qasr al-Nihaya, the End Palace. I was in the hands of thugs who knew no compassion or mercy, evil men who excelled in causing pain and the satisfaction of their innate sadism. They knew how to take their victims to the very threshold of death without allowing them the relief of death itself. And I had no inkling why I was there. In that wretched situation, which beggars description, I find myself in my 60th year, well and truly at the end of the road. I resolved to take my own life in order to be spared any further pain or humiliation. I beat my head against the wall for about 1 hour until I fell down on the floor, helpless. He was not the only one. In that very place, 38 Jews were there, and sadistically they would take him to see his family. 2 months into the arrest, he was there for 1 year, and they will see what state he is, and we will all know what state it is and what's awaiting us. And basically, it was a living hell until my father, like many others in the community, found a way to actually leave everything behind, change our names, have different forged passports in order for us to be able to leave. We were left on our own to leave towards the northern enclave of North Iraq, where the Kurds are, kind and brave people. And some made it and some did not. We did make it, and they took us and hid us until the darkest of the night, and then took us in groups. We were a group of 22 people in one lorry, and for 2 hours we drove across the mountains of northern Iraq in total darkness. The lorry could not even switch on their light because they would have been targeted by the army, and that was the harshest possible even harsher than the checkpoints, because you just looked at the valley and you think, I'm not going to make that, until such time as suddenly the driver stopped us and shouted us to get out quickly, because he has now to go back before sunrise. And he said, you stay here and you people will come and pick you up. And we were shivering. We didn't know whether to dance and rejoice, but we couldn't see anything until an hour later, when the light just began, and suddenly we came in for the rescue, and we were then in safe hands into Iran. And after a trip of 18 hours from that border into Tehran, we were there received warmly by members of the Iraqi, Iranian Jewish community, by members of the Jewish Agency, by the Iranian authorities. We were welcomed. We were given a warm meal and a place to stay, and tickets, a kind of a travel documents that took us to London, my family, and we were then granted asylum and managed, thanks to this very gracious country, very kind country, to rebuild our lives, and thank God for that. And that's my story for you, Joseph.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that will be very familiar to even people of my generation whose parents had similar experiences of life in the Middle East and North Africa. I grew up feeling very proud of my Iraqi Jewish identity. I went to a predominantly Ashkenazi school and belonged to a Sephardi synagogue, but my mum always told me we were Babylonian, and that heritage felt special. And my pride in our unique heritage was renewed when I realized how big our community really was. In the West, we are a minority within a minority, but in Israel, more than half of the Jewish population is Mizrachi, of Middle Eastern and North African descent. Edwin, were you always proud of your Iraqi identity?
It's difficult to say proud. When you're born in the Middle East, you're born with the identity. You are a Jew, and he is Armenian, and the other one is Muslim. It's very different when you come here and people give you courses about, God's existence, or are you a Jew, or do you want to be? It never ever occurred to me to question that God exists and that the Bible is my Torah. And you grow up in a different type of. No, it's not for discussion that you're a Jew. We had, as I said before, years of practicing Judaism, beautiful synagogues, fantastic chagim. I remember all the chagim. For Shavuot, for example, twice a year, once for sure for Shavuot, most of the community would travel to the kever of Yecheskel and Navi, Ezekiel's shrine, which is about 100 kilometers from Baghdad. What a joy that was. We would have, the usual Iraqi food, the red rice and the chicken and the aruk and all this. We would load up and we would travel, and we'd get there 2 hours later, and we'll meet up hundreds of Jews there as we all pray and go around the Ezekiel, and we never felt anything other than pride, and we were received with a big welcome. So this is how I grew up. And then when the things turned dark, we became even closer, of course, as you could imagine. The people, the few thousand people, how close I am to your father or to your mother, it's like literally one family. We became one family under such hardship. We were basically in a ghetto. We were not allowed to leave. I just read only a few weeks ago that the Prime Minister of Iraq, Tahir Yahya, in 1966, as he approached 1967, has given plans to the president to put all male over 16 in a concentration camp. He even chose the location, the the area, how they be guarded, and only the presidents thought about it and rejected the idea of a concentration camp. So that actually got us together. And even today, 50 years later, when we meet each other, it's like yesterday we met. And it's like, so that's how strong my identity is. And I would like to, I mean, when I now fight for the shrines, fight for the 6 biblical prophets that are buried there, more than anywhere else, even more than Israel, of course. And where I fight for the cemeteries or for the old synagogues, it's not for my identity. I know who I am. I know I'm a Babylonian Jew. I know how proud I am of my ancestors who as I said before, wrote the Talmud, set up universities, built civilization. The Judaism that we practice was done in Babel. I don't need to be, I remember, but I do this for you, Joseph, and for my children and for my grandchildren, that one day when things can, and you can see what happened today in Bahrain and in Dubai and in Egypt and in Morocco and Tunisia. I will, one day we might, in my lifetime or not, but we might yet reconnect, but from a different angle and from a different view. And there I want these landmarks to remind you and my children of their own identity.
Brilliant. Well, my talking of sort of returning to Iraq and holding on to that heritage, my parents often dreamt of visiting again. They'd often, my family would often say maybe after Saddam, but it never happened. But many of their generation simply wanted to move on after they left Iraq. And I think the same can be said about many people who left under those sort of conditions from the Arab world. Your last 8 years in Iraq were really difficult, and surely you don't remember your first 8 years. So what makes you feel so strongly about returning and holding on to that connection when some don't even look back?
I actually do remember my first 8 years, Joseph. My first memory was at 3 years old. I remember it like, you know, I checked the story with my mom, and she said absolutely right, and she was just as I do remember. We grew up, you know, more so than normal childhood. You know, we had to be aware, even in the good times, and I have to sort of semi-qualify the good times and the rivers and the food. The Jewish communities in the Arab world after the establishment of the State of Israel were like Fiddler on the Roof. We were actually balancing act. We would, you know, things could turn. Somebody would say a comment. You would always be reminded how even in the good times that you are here on a balancing act. Now, I then came in back here and into this country. My father, the lawyer, after a week here, went and started to work in packing T-shirts 6 days a week, getting up in the morning at 5 o'clock in the morning. But this is the Jewish way. We just rebuild. We are builders, and we don't dwell on memories, and we don't dwell on why we didn't sit down and claim benefits. And my father's hard work sent me to university, and my hard work sent my son to Cambridge. And when he graduated, for me, that was like a testimony, not to me or to my father, but to the Jewish people, how in one generation, from coming here as refugees, asylum seekers, and how we worked and produced so that I can send my son to Cambridge and watch him graduate. So then after everything settled, I was once giving a talk, and like this one, and an sub-editor of a national paper came to me and said, Mr. Shuker, this was absolutely fascinating. I just did not know there were Jews in Iraq. And you know, this one sentence, you asked me what took me back to Iraq. That sentence took me back, because I noticed this was in the 80s, and I looked around and nobody is talking about my ancestors. Nobody even talking about Jews being in Iraq, not even taught in Jewish schools in this country, not even taught in Israel in schools, as if 2,600 years just disappeared. They were written off. The Iraqis certainly took us off, as Yoav was saying. Music that was composed by Jews now suddenly doesn't have a name on it, and therefore I looked around, Joseph, and I said, my God, in my lifetime, with what I have seen, I've been written out of the history and the narrative of the Middle East. And I said, I'm not going to sit for and stand for that. I just took it on as if it was a personal responsibility. And don't get me wrong. I mean, my mom, the word Iraq would send her flying. You know, I came back with pictures of our own house, and she said, I don't want to see anything. My life started in 1971, and that's it. And so it's not, I do not represent the community, but I felt I need to keep that going, and I did. And the first opportunity that I had in 2003, after the fall of Saddam, I took one of the very few seats on a small plane, and there I was going there, and I visited my grandfather's grave and my school and the rivers and the shrines, and I said, you know what, in my lifetime you're not going to deprive me from these, and I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to show you that I won't let go. I will not let go until these things will go back, and until I return my ancestors and our contribution back to the history of the Middle East. And I'm so absolutely delighted. I'm going to end up, when you tell me, I think I've got another few minutes, but I'm going to end up on a story that shows you that you can't write off the Jewish contribution, and you can't write them off history. But so I've got two stories. Have I got time for two stories, Joseph?
Yeah, I was going to say as well, there's an opportunity for people to ask questions. So it would be good if they put their questions in the comments now, and we can come back to it after your stories.
Beautiful. So I'm going to tell two stories. One of them about the Iraqi Jewish archives, and the other one about the Navi Nahum, the prophet Nahum. Each one with a different message. So in 2003, just after the fall of Saddam, and the Americans were in occupation, a senior officer from Saddam Hussein's time came to the place where the Americans are, and suggested something. I will take you to where Jewish artifacts are stored, are kept, thousands and thousands of them, and in return, you give me asylum. And the Americans, there was a guy, a beautiful person who speaks 8 languages, Orthodox Jew, by the name of Harold Rode. And Harold says to him, yeah, you'll come with me. And they took with them some military people, and says, you show me, and if your words are correct, then we'll see what we can do. He took him to a place in Baghdad, a big building, and he said, there, right, in the cellar of this building, you will find thousands and thousands of documents and artifacts and Talmuds. I mean, he said, books of this one. And when they actually went inside, the place was bombed with a huge dam buster bomb, a huge one. But the actual bomb did not explode. It was standing there. But it destroyed all the water system. So when they started going to the cellar, the dirty water was up to 5 feet there. And Harold would pick up from the floor, completely, totally wet, and it would be a Sefer Torah. It would be archives. It would be history. It would be names. It would be Sidurim. And he just, wherever he picked up, and he sat there and sat on the steps, called up his general and said, could you come and drain this place so I can save the history of my people? And the general says, Harold, are you crazy? We are an army at war. We're not a drainage service. Forget it. And there was Harold sitting in tears, watching our history disappearing. When a call came in, I won't mention names on this thing, but a call came in and they said, Harold, how are you? What's going on? And Harold says, you know what? This is where I am. Can you do something? And by the grace of God, this message reached a higher person in the United States of America, who actually immediately put on the National Archives of the United States of America to deal with it. And they sent a freezer 747 jumbo jet, and they took all this material, froze it like rocks, and put it into a freezer plane, and they took it to Texas. And in Texas, they melted each one of them. And over 10 years, they restored 93% of all this trove, 27,000 items. They actually restored it, and in writing. And I happened to be in Washington completely by coincidence, giving a talk when somebody said, this is a group of Christian parliamentarians. One thing I was talking about the Middle East, and they said, we are going to see the Iraqi Jewish archives, a brand new exhibition that just opened with about 30 items out of 27,000. And that's all that's going to be, they're going to tell us the story. And I said, oh my God, can I come? And they said, of course. But later they said, oh, the guide is not going to be able to make it. He's gone sick, and we can't. What's the point? You can't do it without a guide. So I said, I'll guide it. And they said, well, we don't even know what it is. I said, I'll go now, half an hour earlier, and I'll find out what it is. So I go there, and I see this. They said, this is with the curator. And I said, what is this? And she said, this is the oldest Talmud we found. This is the oldest Torah we can find. And I'm taking quick notes. This is how this thinking. And there was a little place that says, this is personal items. What's personal items? She said, divorce, ketubah, and we have 2 certificates from the Jewish school there. I said, I bet it's the same school that I went, Frank Eni. She said, yes, it is Frank Eni school. I go in there to see the report of the 2 things, and I looked at it as like 1 boy and 1 girl. And I looked at the boy's certificate, and it was mine. It was my certificate with my picture in from 1967. I was 12 at the time. And I looked at it in this total disbelief. And I looked at the curator and I said, excuse me, why did you choose this boy and this girl? And she said, oh, it's easy because all the paper and all the certificates from the school were totally drowned in water. Now we can preserve writing, but we can't preserve pictures. And this little boy's picture was right at the top. It was almost perfect. So that's why we picked that one, because of the picture. And I said, but this little boy is me. And she looked in total and utter disbelief. And then she looked at the big sign that says, this certificate belongs to Edwin ben Shaul ben Moshe Shuker. And she said, and we fell on each other and started crying. And at that time, the rest of the group came. And the group came in, and I did not know how does one express that. So I was showing them, this is the Holy Talmud, and then when we got to the certificate, I said, please come closer to me. This is something that I want to share with you. And I had 58 people standing there, and I did not know what I'm going to say. And I then opened my mouth, and I want to share what I said with them. I said, this looks like a school certificate, but it is not. This is an identity. This young boy has left his identity back home, back in Baghdad, and he ran away from that home. And in came Saddam Hussein and his henchmen and emptied the house and took everything of worth and everything which got a name in it, and took that certificate and put it in a cellar in the intelligence building. And in that cellar, it stayed for 32 years. And then the Americans bombed it. And then they flooded by water. And then it was frozen. And then it was taken by plane and went to Texas and stayed for 10 years. And this little boy today is seeing his identity. that he left behind back in Baghdad. And today he's reuniting with it. And then I stopped and said something that I want to share with everybody. And I said, don't you ever write the Jewish people off. I said they can go through water and through hell. They can go through fire and through gas chambers. But you bet, they will be there, witnesses to what is happening. So don't you ever write them off. We are witnesses to the truth, and we are witnesses to what's going on, and we will always be there. And with this, I want to hand back to you to see what questions we have.
Well, I was hoping I could ask you one more question, Edwin. And just to remind everyone, please put any questions in the comment that you have for Edwin. I'm sure he'd love to answer them. So please put them in the comments. I wanted to say, Edwin, when people first find out that my parents are Iraqi, despite the fact that I've never been to Iraq, I was born in London, they often ask me if I've ever been back. And I have to tell them I've never been, and my parents have never returned. But I would love to visit one day. Perhaps I'd need to brush up on my Arabic first, but I'd love to visit my parents' houses, their schools and neighborhoods, to see the settings of all the stories that I was told as a child. So my question to you is, I don't know how many people from my generation are watching tonight, but what can I and people from my generation do to preserve this heritage? And will we one day be able to go back and visit the settings of the stories we've heard our parents tell us?
First of all, I want to thank the Board of Deputies. I want to thank the Rep Council of Manchester for giving us this opportunity, Joseph. This is the first step. Iraqi people at your age who are watching today will feel differently about their identity and the need to ask their parents or grandparents more and to record it, because one day they're going to have to give it to their children and grandchildren like you have to. And one day they will say, you know what, I wish I asked my parents or my grandparents more. But the first thing you could do is to literally go back home today and ask your father and your mother for as much details as possible. Record them, number one. Number two, the work that was done by so many of us, and by Harif, by your mom, by the Linda Menuhin, by J. Jack, all that work over the last 15, 20 years has given rise to, first of all, finally a recognition by the Knesset in 2014 that this thing needs to be remembered not as an ethnic story to fill in when you have a space in an education program in the shul. No, this has to be incorporated in the history of the Jewish people. The same as my children go to Poland and incorporated the Holocaust as if it is their history. It is also the time that our history, the Oriental Jews, the Mizrachi, the Sephardi Jews, has their history incorporated into our main schools, into the history of the Jewish people. So then there was, even only 2 years ago, the initiative, Kaddish Initiative. What does Kaddish Initiative? It wants every single synagogue, regardless of denomination and country and whether there are Oriental Jews with them or not, to actually read Kaddish on the Shabbat before the 30th of November. For those of Jews in the Arab countries, that their cemeteries now are inaccessible, which is most. Libya, Algeria, Iraq, Yemen, all these things now are inaccessible for people to go to visit their parents or grandparents. So we want the whole Jewish people to read Kaddish on their story. So the more we do of that, the more we talk about the story, the more that 30th of November becomes as entrenched in the diary of the UK and the world, the same way as Yom HaShoah. Regardless, it's not optional. It's not this year, we've done it last year, we saw the film last year. No, I'm afraid not. Every single year, part and parcel. Then that gives you and your own children, Joseph, please God, in time, the appetite, the knowledge, the curiosity. So when Iraq opens up, and it surely will, there is no. I was listening to the foreign minister of Bahrain talking the other day, and he said, if you would have asked Bahrainis 15 years ago whether they would want normalization with Israel, 90% would say no. Today, if you ask them, 90% will say yes. The same going to Dubai. You know, I'm off to Dubai on this Thursday. You know why? I have not been able to pray in a minyan here for weeks, for months. You know what there is in Dubai now? 3 minyanim. I'm just choosing which one to go to on Shabbat. So things can change and things will change. And I'm going to tell you, 10 years ago, you would have a problem finding an Iraqi Arab giving his name and saying good things about the Jews. Today, you cannot believe it. I mean, you can ask your mom, you can ask what's happening in Israel. Today, I would say positive comments come in the late 90s from the people of Iraq. And even the Foreign Ministry of Israel has opened a website. There was one that says Israel speaks Arabic. This one says Israel speaks Iraqi, because the man in the street is demanding it. But I want to mention something today that sits here, and the Iraqi. After 2003, they made a constitution, a most wonderful constitution, full of great things about freedom and about democracy, and about the right to be an Iraqi. And then in 2006, they bring a law of nationality that gives all these rights enshrined in law, and it says except for those whose nationality was taken away because of the 1951. In other words, all rights are deprived for a Jew, even today. In the democratic Iraq, a law that says it applies to all Iraqis without exception, except for the Jew. The Jew, anybody who lost his property between 1968 and 2003 during Saddam gets back his property, except for the Jew. And that is something that I can't see how the outside world, how the United Nations, how the nations of the world who are actually now coming to assist Iraq and lift them, how can they live without telling the prime minister, without telling the ministers, excuse me, guys, there's a law in 2006 that deprived only the Jew from any of his rights. And this cannot be. You cannot be a modern state, part of the United Nations, when you actually make that happening.
I wanted to invite Yoav back in to talk about this subject with us. We had a question in from Nathan Baroda, a similar question. He's saying thank you to Edwin for telling your amazing story. His question is, what can young people do to tell your story to our generation? And I wondered if Yoav had any input as well.
Yeah, so thank you for asking, and also thank you, Edwin, for your wonderful life story that is really inspiring at this moment in time. What can young people do is a really great question, and it's something that I've been doing for quite a while here in London, and that is go on YouTube. There's tons and tons and tons of information from every single ethnicity. I've been managing to learn here in London how to bake lahoh, which is Yemen flatbread. There's recipes online. There's ways that we can integrate to tell the story, really, the story of the people. Edwin, you'll surely agree with me, is through the food. It's through the joys, the music, the laughter. And that is the story. Even myself, I am an Israeli. I was born in Israel to Israeli parents. My grandparents all came from different ethnic countries into Israel. And I didn't know anything else except Israel. And then that is exactly when I was like, okay, I'm half Yemen. Why don't I find things about this? And I'm half Polish. Why don't I speak some Polish, the Polish language? Why don't I try to eat some of the Polish food? And so telling the story, really the story is through either speaking to your parents or grandparents who are still alive and still recognize and still know, recording, and take that information and keep it there. It's from reading stories. There's a lot of material that you can get online, a lot of books that recount the tales. In fact, I have in my small library over here, books written in the Yemenite dialect of Hebrew. It's wonderful. The amount of information that you can get is astounding. Just go out and look.
And Edwin, I know you've been involved in many different projects and initiatives across the Middle East. Can you tell us a bit more about them and how they help us hold on to our heritage, not just in Iraq, but elsewhere as well?
Yes, thank you, Joseph. I will finish with this story and tell you about what happened in Egypt, for example, is what the Egyptians decided that the Jewish landmarks, Jewish heritage is very much part and parcel of the history of Egypt. So they embarked on clearing up and cleaning the graveyards, rebuilding synagogues, and only the beginning of this year, they restored one of the greatest synagogues in the Middle East, the Alexandria synagogue. They spent well over $5 million on making this glorious place. And we met there. Of course, I was just a spectator, but I joined 180 Egyptian Jews going back to that synagogue and praying and bringing the name of Hashem back into that place. Now, I think that many other Arab countries would contribute quickly before these landmarks disappear. And what I am calling for, I think, like you said earlier, there's hardly any Jews left now. 3,500, 4,000 Jews. It has been ethnically cleansed. But this is the book of the exile, the book of exile of Jews into this region. And that book is coming to an end very soon, next couple of years. I'm calling for the opening of another book now, the post-exile book, the connection between the Jew, the Oriental Jew, and the other Jews, and their countries of origin, even if they were not born there, even if their parents were not born there. But actually, our mission as a Jew has not finished. We're there to do tikkun olam. We're there to bring a blessing. And there is no reason why we don't go back to these countries now, post-exile, and open another book where the landmarks are symbols of the coexistence of the past 1,400 years with the Muslims and 2,600 years with the region. And now we look forward to have that as a bridge of coexistence for the next generation, for the next era of that. And the story of Nahum is that in the early 90s, a Christian guy wrote to the community here and saying, I am here seeing that the Prophet Nahum in a place called Al-Qosh, which is 2 hours from Erbil in the north, the whole thing is collapsing. The roof has collapsed. These fences have fallen. The animals are running wild. And this is a prophet. And we actually, within the community, we sent him some funds. And all he did was to put a fence, at least stop the rot. In the early 2000 something, I I had the opportunity to go to the north and to Erbil, and they took me to Al-Qosh for this Navi Nahum. I went there. Of course, the fence was there, but was little else. I jumped the fence. There was no one around. The place was falling. The water was seeping, and I took on my tefillin and my talit, and I sat on the shrine and I prayed. As I was doing that, somebody comes in from nowhere, started screaming, shouting, really agitated. And he looked at me and he saw the talit and the tefillin, and he says, "My God, are you a Jew?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "My name is Nasir, and I am here 5th-generation caretaker of the Prophet. And in my lifetime, I have not seen a Jew." And I said, "You are 5th generation?" So we sat there. I've asked him 100 questions. Your father, your grandfather, what was there? What do they remember? What this one and what that? As I was leaving, he then screamed. And he said, Mister, can I ask you a question? And I said, "Sure." And he said, who gave you the right to abandon your prophet here? And that was the next sentence that changed my thoughts and my life. And we collected at the time $25,000, and we just built a roof on top of that to stop the rain destroying what was there. Years later, an American NGO, a Christian NGO, looking for a shrine to restore, having done one in Afghanistan. Somebody said, "Here is a shrine in Al-Qosh," and they decided this will be it, a Jewish prophet, a real Jewish prophet. And they collected $4.5 million, and they have rebuilt this place brick by brick, item by item, stone by stone. And we were 2 months from actually making that glorious finishing where we could show the world that how things cannot be taken for, that they can't, there's always hope. There's always hope. There's always something that could turn up. And because of Corona, the work has stopped. The work is scheduled to start in March, and hopefully by the summer, this glorious place will be back again as gloriously as possible. There might be no Jews at the moment, but they will be. They will come, like they are filling up back to the Middle East. There will come a day when that is there. And I want to finish, Joseph, today with the words of the late teacher, Gadol Dor, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Lebracha. And he says these words that I want to end my contribution tonight. He says, "I believe that I'm a character in our people's story with my own chapter to write, and so are we all. To be a Jew is to see yourself as part of that story, to make it live in our time, and to do your best to hand it on to those who will come after us." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edwin, for sharing your stories. We've had many lovely comments. It's a very difficult story to tell, but for all the reasons we just discussed, it's a very important one. And thank you again to Yoav for contributing to this section as well, but of course for the music. And thank you to the Jewish Rep Council and the Board of Deputies for inviting me to take part in the event. I'll now hand over to Jeremy for the closing remarks and to deliver a vote of thanks. Thank you, Jeremy.
Very much indeed, Joseph. And thank you both to Edwin and to Yoav as well. An absolutely amazing evening, fantastic evening. I mean, my parents were from Poland and Latvia, but yet, what can I say? It's we're all Iraqi Jews. Tonight, we're all Iraqi. Don't forget that. I'd like to thank, as well as those who have just taken part so brilliantly, I want to thank those who also are behind the scenes. Sarah, Judy, Leo, and Sander, those who've worked so hard to make this event happen, and they're, you won't see them, but they're there behind the scenes, and they really have done a tremendous job. It's wonderful that the Jewish Representative Council of Greater Manchester and Region should have joined with the board on this, and it was actually the instigation of one of our members, Karen Solomons, who wanted that we should remember and be involved in the commemoration of the Mizrachi Jews, and it was her idea that led to this meeting tonight. So thank you very much indeed, Karen. Before we go, I just want to point out that there are two events coming up. One sponsored by the board with Harif, and one sponsored by the Jewish Representative Council with the Zionist Central Council and with the Centre for Jewish Studies at the university. The board have got one tomorrow. Again, those who want to learn even more about Mizrachi Jewry, there is an event tomorrow, and you'll see a poster about it in a minute, and Leo's going to put it up, and you can see the details and how to log on. The Jewish Representative Council on Thursday is having something totally different. It's called the Sherman Lecture, and we have Dr. Miri Freud-Kandel from Oxford University talking about Louis Jacobs, the rabbi who has done so much to shake up Anglo Jewry, and we're looking at his contribution to this. And of course, there was a book published only a couple of weeks ago by Harry Freeman about this. If you go onto our website, jewishmanchester.org, you'll be able to find the link, and that's at 7:30 on Thursday. So finally, I'd like to thank you all for listening tonight. I've seen you've been coming from all over the world. It's the most marvelous thing. And so thank you very much for listening to us, for watching us, and have a safe journey to your teacups. And we'll see you again, hopefully very soon.